The music room at the Kensington Academy was the kind of place that made you want to whisper. Sunlight, thick and golden like honey, poured through the tall windows, painting long rectangles across the polished wooden floor. It landed on the grand piano in the corner, making its dark wood glow. The air smelled of old books, lemon polish, and something else, something like quiet importance. A girl stood just inside the doorway, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her backpack. The backpack was faded purple, a little frayed at the edges. She was 10 years old, with messy brown hair tied back in a ponytail that had already started to come loose. Her name was Alara. She felt very small in this very big, quiet room. Next to her stood her mother. She wore a simple, clean dress and held her own hands tightly together. She worked at the academy, not as a teacher, but as one of the people who cleaned the classrooms after everyone had gone home. She knew every scuff mark on these floors, every dusty corner in the library. But she had never sat in one of these plush chairs as a guest. Today was different. For weeks, she had gathered her courage, finally speaking to the head of the music department about her daughter. She had explained, her voice soft but firm, that her child had a gift, a special ear. Somehow, she had secured this chance, an audition for a scholarship for private piano lessons. Alara's heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She loved piano more than anything. The sound of it filled her head day and night. But this room, this piano, this moment, it was all so much bigger than she had imagined. At the far end of the room, behind a large oak desk, sat Miss Thorne. She was the piano instructor. She had a sharp, elegant look about her, like a carefully drawn pencil sketch. Her gray hair was swept into a neat bun, and she wore a pair of glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at the clipboard in her hands, then up at Alara and her mother. She did not smile. "You must be Alara," Miss Thorne said. Her voice was not unkind, but it was cool and clear, like the note from a tuning fork. "Please, come and sit at the piano." Alara walked forward, her sneakers making tiny, almost silent squeaks on the floor. She stopped in front of the grand piano, her eyes wide. She had never been this close to an instrument so beautiful. Gently, almost afraid, she reached out and touched the edge of the lid. The wood was smooth and cool. "You may begin with some scales," Miss Thorne said, taking her glasses from her chain and putting them on. "C major, 4 octaves, please." Alara's stomach dropped. Scales? She knew what they were, of course. She had heard other students practice them, running up and down the keys like musical exercises. But she had never learned them in order, not by name. She knew the piano by sound, by feeling, by the stories the keys could tell when you pressed them in the right combination. She didn't know them by rules. Hesitantly, she placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool and firm. She started to press, trying to remember the sound, fumbling for the right pattern. The notes came out uneven, some too loud, some too soft, and she missed a few, hitting wrong ones that clashed in the quiet room. Her face grew hot. Miss Thorne watched, her pen poised over a clipboard. She made a small mark. "I see," she said, her tone flat. "Let's try something else." She stood, walked to a tall cabinet, and pulled out a book of sheet music. She flipped through the pages and selected one, placing it on the music stand in front of Alara. It was a simple beginner's piece called Little Song. The notes on the staves looked like a confusing swarm of black insects to Alara. "Play this," Ms. Thorne instructed, stepping back. Alara stared at the page. The lines, the dots, the strange symbols, they meant nothing to her. They were a secret code she hadn't been taught. She knew songs. She knew melodies that lived in her head and her heart. But this paper was a foreign language. She looked from the sheet music to the white and black keys, her mind racing, trying to find a connection that wasn't there. A long, uncomfortable silence filled the room. The only sound was the quiet hum of the building. "Begin whenever you are ready," Miss Thorne said, a hint of impatience now coloring her voice. Elara took a shaky breath. She picked out a single note, middle C, hoping it might be a start. Then she looked back at the page, lost. She tried another note, a G, but it was just a guess. The piece was supposed to flow, to have a rhythm, but what came out was a series of slow, lonely, disconnected sounds. It was clear she was not reading the music. She was guessing dot after about a minute. Elara's hands fell into her lap. She couldn't look at Miss Thorne. She couldn't look at her mother. She stared at her own knees, feeling a lump grow in her throat. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so quietly it was almost just a breath, "dot misse." Thorne let out a slow sigh. She took off her glasses and let them hang. She looked from Elara to her mother, who was standing by the door, her face a mask of hope that was starting to crack. "Mrs. Evans," Miss Thorne said, addressing Elara's mother. Her voice was softer now, but it was the softness of pity, not kindness. "I appreciate you bringing Elara in. She seems like a sweet child. But the purpose of this scholarship is to nurture students who show a foundational understanding, who can build upon a solid base of theory and technique." She gestured toward the piano. "As you can see, the child can't even read music. She doesn't know her scales. There is no foundation here to build upon. To invest our resources, to invest my time, would be, I'm afraid, a disservice to everyone. It would be setting her up for failure." The words hung in the sunny, quiet room. They were final. They were heavy. Elara's mother nodded slowly, her eyes shiny. She didn't argue. She just said, "Thank you for your time, Miss Thorne." Miss Thorne gave a small, professional nod. "The best of luck to you, Elara," she said, though her attention was already drifting back to her clipboard, to the next student, to the proper order of things. Elara stood up from the piano bench. She didn't look at the glorious instrument. She just walked back to her mother, took her hand, and together they left the music room. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing away the golden light and the smell of polish and importance. The hallway outside felt colder, darker, and very, very quiet. The audition was over. The walk home from the academy was a quiet one. Elara's mother held her hand tightly, a silent message passing between them. It wasn't a sad squeeze, not exactly. It was more solid than that. It was a squeeze that said, "I am here. We are together." They didn't talk about the audition. What was there to say? The words from the music room seemed to float around them in the cool afternoon air, and giving them voice would have made them too real, too heavy to carry. Instead of going straight to their small apartment, Elara's mother did something she often did after a difficult day. She said, "I have to pick up my things from my locker. Come with me." This meant going back into the academy, but through the side door, down a flight of concrete stairs into the basement. This was a different world from the sunlit halls and grand rooms upstairs. The air here was cooler, smelled faintly of old paper, cleaning supplies, and the damp, earthy scent of stone. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their light flat and unkind compared to the golden sun upstairs. The walls were lined with gray lockers for the staff, and further down, the corridor opened into a large storage room. This was Elara's favorite place in the whole world. His storage room was a cavern of forgotten things. Old desks were stacked on their sides like sleeping giants. Boxes of out-of-date textbooks formed shaky towers. A broken globe sat in a corner, its axis tilted. And in the very center of this quiet chaos, sitting under a single dusty window that let in a narrow beam of daylight, was an old upright piano. It was nothing like the grand piano in Miss Thorne's room. Its dark brown wood was scratched and scuffed. One of its front legs was slightly shorter than the others, so it always leaned a little to the left, like a patient old dog tilting its head. Several of the white keys were yellowed with age, and one near the middle had a small chip missing from its corner. It was, by every measure, a forgotten thing, but to Ilara, it was perfect. Her mother went to her locker, and Ilara, as if pulled by a magnet, walked straight to the piano. She dropped her faded purple backpack on the floor with a soft thud. She didn't need to ask permission. This was their secret, unspoken agreement. While her mother finished her work, this was Ilara's domain. She lifted the creaky fallboard, revealing the worn keys. She sat on the wobbly wooden stool and placed her small hands in her lap for a moment, just listening to the deep quiet of the basement. Then she began to play dot, not from sheet music, not scales. She played the feeling of the walk home. She played the cool air outside, the tightness in her chest in Miss Thorne's room, and then the relief of coming down here, to this safe, familiar place. The notes were slow and searching at first, a few low chords that rumbled softly in the quiet room. Then a melody emerged, simple and a little sad, but with a thread of warmth running through it. The piano was slightly out of tune, but in this room it sounded right. It sounded true. This was how she learned. Not with books or rules or a metronome's tick. She learned with her ears and her hands and her heart. When she was very little, her mother would sometimes hum tunes while she worked snippets of songs from the radio, old lullabies from her own childhood. Ilara would sit at this old piano, and with a focus that seemed too deep for a child, she would hunt for those sounds on the keyboard. Note by note, she would find them, her face a picture of intense concentration, until the hummed melody became a real one under her fingers. Then, about a year ago, a new person had entered the world of the basement. An older man, the night janitor. He was a quiet man with gentle eyes and thick, weathered hands that looked like they had done a lifetime of work. He had seen Ilara at the piano one evening, had stopped his mopping to listen. He didn't shoo her away. He just nodded and went back to work. A few nights later, as Ilara was picking out a tune from a cartoon she'd heard, he walked over, put down his mop bucket, and sat on an old desk nearby. "That one is happy," he had said, his voice carrying a soft, rolling accent she couldn't place. "But it sits high in the chest, yes, like a bird." He had then reached over and with one rough finger pressed a low, deep note on the piano. The sound vibrated through the stool. "That one," he said, "that one is from the boots. That is the sound of walking a long road." From that day on, he became her guide. His name was Mr. Anton. He was from a country far away called Poland. And he knew music. Not in the way Miss Thorne knew it, with all its rules and names. He knew it as stories. On his breaks, he would sit at the old piano. He wouldn't play fancy, complicated pieces. He would play feelings. He would say, "Listen, this is a winter wind in the mountains." And his left hand would play low, rumbling clusters of notes, while his right hand danced with high, cold, tinkling sounds. "And this," he would say, shifting his hands, "this is the sun coming out and melting the ice on the branches." The music would change, becoming softer, dripping with gentle, major chords. He played folk dances that made you want to tap your foot, and slow, mournful melodies he called dunkas that told tales of homesickness. He never used the word minor or major. He called them the cloudy day sounds and the sunny field sounds. And Ilara watched. She absorbed it like a sponge. She saw how his hands moved, how he pressed the pedals to make the sounds blur together like mist, or lifted his foot to make them sharp and clear. She listened to the stories in the music, and then, when he was done, she would try. She would close her eyes and try to bring back the winter wind or the joyful dance. Her fingers would stumble at first, but then they would find the path. She couldn't read a single note, but she could remember a landscape of sound. Mr. Anton never corrected her in the way a teacher would. He would just listen, his head tilted. If she played the long road sound when she meant to play the bird sound, he would say, I think your bird has decided to walk for a bit. Let's help him fly again. And he would play the phrase, not for her to copy note for note, but for her to feel the likeness of it. Tonight, after the disaster of the audition, Alara played her own sad confusion into the old piano. Mr. Anton came in halfway through, pushing his cleaning cart. He stopped and listened, not saying a word. When she finished, the last note fading into the hum of the lights, he wheeled his cart closer. The music upstairs, he said quietly, not asking, just stating a fact. It did not go well. Alara shook her head, staring at the chipped key. She said, I can't read music. She said there's no foundation. Mr. Anton was silent for a long moment. He pulled a clean rag from his cart and began to gently wipe the dust from the top of the piano. A foundation, he mused. They think it is paper and ink. Rules. They build their house on that. He tapped the side of the piano with his knuckle. It made a solid wooden sound. This is also a foundation. The sound, the story, the feeling in here. He tapped his own chest. Your house, it is built on that. It is a different house. Not worse, different. But it's not a real house to them, Alara whispered, the truth of it aching. Mr. Anton finished wiping the piano. He looked at her, his old eyes kind and serious. Then you must play for them a room from your house. You must play for them a story so clear they cannot pretend they do not see the walls or feel the floor beneath their feet. He gave her a small, almost secret smile. We will find the right story. He didn't say anything else. He went back to his work, the squeak of his cartwheels echoing down the basement corridor. Alara stayed at the piano. The tight, ashamed feeling from upstairs was slowly melting away, replaced by a low, steady warmth. Here, in the basement, with the scratched wood and the dusty light and the old man's stories in her ears, she wasn't a girl who couldn't read music. She was a girl who could listen and feel and make the old piano sing. And that, for now, was enough. The week that followed the audition felt strange to Alara. The world upstairs at Kensington Academy went on as it always did, bright and busy and full of purpose. But she felt like she was moving through it, wrapped in a thin, invisible blanket. She helped her mother after school, wiping down blackboards in empty classrooms, the smell of chalk dust filling her nose. She saw other students hurrying through the halls with instrument cases or folders of sheet music, their conversations buzzing with talk of the upcoming spring recital. The spring recital was the big event of the term. It was held in the main auditorium, a place with velvet curtains and seats that seemed to go on forever. Parents would dress up. Teachers would beam with pride. The very best music students would perform every afternoon. As Alara worked with her mother, she could hear the sounds of practice drifting through the building. The repetitive scales from the beginner rooms. The shaky violin notes from around a corner. But one sound always made her stop whatever she was doing and just listen. It came from Miss Thorne's closed music room door, and it was a piece for piano. A torrent of notes that seemed to rush like a fast river, then slow into something sad and beautiful, then dash away again with playful energy. It had a name, she heard the older students say, with a kind of respectful awe. Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. The student playing it was a boy in a crisp uniform. A boy who carried himself with a sure confidence Alara couldn't imagine. His name was Alexander. She had seen him pass in the hall, his sheet music tucked neatly under his arm. He was everything she was not polished, trained, correct. She would linger in the hallway, a damp cleaning rag forgotten in her hand, listening to him practice. She heard the mistakes, the spots where he would stop and repeat a measure again and again. She heard the cold perfection when he finally got it right. But in her head she heard more. She heard the story Mr. Anton might tell about it. The Russian notes weren't just notes. They were a sudden summer rainstorm. The sad, singing middle part was someone standing at a window, remembering a lost friend. The return of the fast melody was the joy that comes after grief, a dance in the puddles. She memorized it not with her eyes, but with her whole body. Her fingers would twitch at her sides, pressing imaginary keys against the seam of her jeans down in the basement that week. Mr. Anton noticed the change in her. She wasn't playing her own little melodies as much. She was quiet, thoughtful. "The storm music," he said one evening, not looking at her as he wound a long electrical cord around his elbow. "It sits in your ears, yes?" Elara nodded. "He's playing it for the recital. Miss Thorne's student. It's like a whole world." "It is," Mr. Anton agreed. Chopin knew how to put a world into a box of wood and wire. He put the coiled cord away. "Can you play that world?" Elara looked at the old scratched keys of their piano. She thought of the storm, the memory, the dance. She didn't know if she could. It was so big, so complicated. But the music was living inside her now, humming in her bones. She gave a tiny, uncertain shrug. Maybe parts of it. Mr. Anton's eyes gleamed in the dim basement light. He walked over and sat heavily on the old desk. "This teacher," he began, his voice low and thoughtful, "she sees only one path, the path of the written note. She thinks because you do not walk her path, you are standing still." He leaned forward. "You must show her you are on a different path, and that your path also leads somewhere beautiful." "How?" Elara asked, the word barely a whisper. A plan began to form in Mr. Anton's mind. It was a risky plan, a little bit of a mischievous plan. The spring recital had a tradition. After the main programmed performances, there was a short open mic time. It was for brave beginners, for students who wanted to try something simple. It was usually met with kind, patient applause. "The recital," he said. "They have the open time at the end. You could play." Elara's eyes went wide with panic. "On that big stage? In front of everyone? I can't." "Not your little songs," Mr. Anton said calmly. "You play his song. You play the storm." The idea was so terrifying, so enormous, that Elara felt dizzy. Play Alexander's piece? The one he'd been practicing for months? The one that proved he was the best? "Miss Thorne would never let me," she said. "She said I wasn't worth the time." "Ah," said Mr. Anton, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "We do not ask for permission. We create a demonstration. A little wager." The next day, Mr. Anton waited for Miss Thorne outside the music room. He was in his janitor's uniform, holding a push broom, the picture of humble work. When she came out, locking her door with a crisp click, he cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am, Miss Thorne?" She turned, a slight frown on her face. She was busy, her mind on recital details. "Yes?" "It is about the little girl," he said, his accent a bit thicker, playing the part of the simple worker. "Elara, the one who cleans with her mother." Miss Thorne's frown deepened. "What about her?" "She talks always of the recital. She has a deep wish to play in the open time." He saw the immediate refusal forming on her lips and quickly continued. "I told her, a girl who does not read notes, it is not possible. But she insists. She hears your best student practicing the difficult Chopin. She says she can play it too." He allowed himself a small, disbelieving chuckle, shaking his head. "Silly child. Miss Thorne's expression shifted from impatience to cold amusement. This was the perfect object lesson. It would show the entire student body, in the starkest way, the absolute necessity of discipline, of theory, of reading music. It would be the final proof that her harsh judgment of the girl was correct. "She says she can play the Fantaisie Impromptu?" Miss Thorne asked, one eyebrow arched. "So she says to me, in the basement," Mr. Anton said, shrugging. "On that old, broken piano down there." It is the dreaming of a child. A spark lit in Miss Thorne's eyes. This was better than she could have planned. "A child's dream, indeed," she said, her voice crisp. "But you know, Mr. Anton, ma'am." "Mr. Anton, sometimes the most powerful lessons are learned through failure. If she is so determined to make a public spectacle of her limitations, and I will not stand in her way." She straightened her shoulders. "She may have the open mic slot. Let her try." Mr. Anton bowed his head slightly. "You are very kind to allow it." "It is not kindness," Miss Thorne corrected him, already turning to leave. "It is pedagogy." She walked away, her heels clicking a firm, final rhythm on the polished floor. Mr. Anton watched her go, the humble look on his face melting away into one of quiet triumph. He had done it. He had gotten the girl her stage. That evening, he found Ilara at the old piano. She was trying to piece together the stormy opening of the Chopin, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. "It is done," he said softly. "You will play at the recital." The color drained from Ilara's face. The reality of it crashed down on her. The big room. The hundreds of eyes. Miss Thorne watching. Alexander listening. "I can't," she breathed, her hands freezing above the keys. Mr. Anton put a heavy, warm hand on her small shoulder. "You can," he said. His voice was no longer that of the old janitor. It was the voice of her guide, her storyteller. Forget the crowd. Forget the teacher. Forget the boy. You play the story. You play the summer rain for me. You play the lonely memory for me. You play the dance in the puddles for me. That is all. You just tell me the story." He pulled up a chair and sat beside the piano stool, waiting. He was her audience, the only one that mattered. Ilara looked at his kind, expectant face. She looked at the familiar chipped keys of her piano. She took a deep, shaky breath, closed her eyes, and listened for the storm inside her. Then she began to play. It was hesitant. It was full of holes where her fingers forgot the way. It was nowhere near perfect, but for the first time, the story was there. The feeling was there. And as she played for him, the terrifying image of the stage began, just a little, to fade away. In its place was just the music, and the old man listening, and the world she was trying to build, note by felt note, out of thin air. The sound of the applause was a physical thing. It washed over Ilara in warm, roaring waves, so loud it made the air itself feel thick. She sat on the piano stool, small and stunned, staring out at the standing, clapping blur of the audience. Her ears were ringing. She could see her mother in the front row, her face wet with tears, but she couldn't hear her crying. The world had become a bright, noisy, overwhelming painting. Slowly, carefully, she slid off the stool. The movement broke the spell for the crowd, and the applause swelled even louder for a moment as she gave a tiny, awkward nod. She didn't know how to bow. She just wanted to get away from the lights. She turned and walked off the stage, the sound following her like a tidal wave until she passed through the heavy velvet curtain into the shadows backstage. Here. The noise was muffled, but the air was charged with a different kind of intensity. The other performers, the ones who had played their correct, careful pieces, looked at her with wide, confused eyes. They didn't know what to make of her. She had broken all the unspoken rules, and yet the audience had loved her most of all. Alexander was standing near the water cooler, his sheet music still in his hand. He looked at her, his face not angry, but deeply puzzled, as if she were a math problem that didn't have a solution. Elara didn't look at any of them. She walked straight past, heading for the darkest, quietest corner she could find, the same spot with the dust cloths where she had hidden before. She just needed to breathe. She leaned her back against the cold brick wall, the rough material of the curtain brushing her arm, and closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she could still see the storm, the memory, the dance. Her fingers tingled. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching. They were too quiet, too hesitant, unlike the confident clicks from earlier in the evening. Elara. The voice was familiar, but it was stripped of its usual crispness. It sounded softer, uncertain. Elara opened her eyes, Ms. Thorne stood a few feet away. The teacher's posture was different. Her shoulders, usually pulled back so straight, were slightly rounded. She wasn't holding a clipboard. Her hands were empty, held loosely at her sides. In the dim backstage light, her face looked older, the lines around her eyes deeper. She wasn't smiling, but the cold, assessing look was gone. In its place was something raw and open. It was the look of someone whose entire world had just shifted, and who hadn't yet found her balance. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The sounds of the audience finally settling down, the murmur of people gathering their things in the auditorium, seemed far away. How? Miss Thorne finally asked. It was just one word, whispered. It wasn't a demand. It was a genuine, almost pleading question. Elara swallowed. Her throat was dry. I listen, she said, her own voice small in the quiet space. But the piece, Ms. Thorne said, taking a small step closer. It's intricate. It has complex rhythms, overlapping hands. You learned it by ear? Elara nodded. She thought of the basement. Mr. Anton, the janitor. He plays it. He plays stories. He says this part is a summer rain. That part is someone remembering. The fast part at the end is a dance. She spoke haltingly, trying to translate a feeling into words. I just try to play the story. Ms. Thorne listened. She heard the words summer rain, remembering, a dance. These were not musical terms. They were not in any textbook she taught from. And yet they had just produced the most musically compelling performance of the night. The girl wasn't describing technique. She was describing expression. The very thing Miss Thorne had spent her career teaching people to find after they mastered the technique. This child had found the soul of the music first, and somehow her hands had followed. A profound humility washed over the teacher. She had seen a blank sheet of music and declared the page empty. She had failed to see that the story was already written, in a language she didn't understand, on the girl's heart. I was wrong, Miss Thorne said. The words came out quietly, but clearly. They seemed to surprise even her to hear them spoken aloud. I looked at you, and I saw an absence. I saw what you did not know. I did not see what you understand. Elara didn't know what to say. She just looked at the teacher, waiting. Ms. Thorne took a deep breath, as if steadying herself. What you can do. It is a rare gift. A kind of pure musical instinct. But she continued, and now her voice took on a new tone, not the old, cold authority, but a careful, respectful seriousness. But even the most beautiful wildflower can grow stronger with a little care. What if? She paused, choosing her words with more care than she ever had when assigning scales. What if the stories you feel could be given even more colors? What if you could learn to write them down so others could play them? What if you could understand the rules, not to cage your music, but to give you more keys to unlock even more stories? Elara blinked. She wasn't being dismissed. She was being offered something. The scholarship, Miss Thorne said. It is yours. A real one. Not out of pity. Because this academy. Because I need to learn from you as much as you might learn from me. I can teach you the language of the notes. You can remind us all what the notes are for. At that moment, Elara's mother appeared, her eyes still red but shining. She had been hovering nearby, listening. She came and put an arm around Elara's shoulders, pulling her close. Miss Thorne looked at the mother. I owe you both an apology, she said, her voice thick. I judged too quickly. Elara's mother simply nodded, holding her daughter tighter. She didn't need an apology. She had always known what her daughter carried inside, from the stage door entrance. A figure lingered. Mr. Anton had come to find Elara. He saw the teacher talking to her, saw the mother holding her, and he stayed where he was, not wanting to interrupt. A slow, deep satisfaction settled in his chest. His little magician had done it. Ms. Thorne followed Elara's glance and saw the old janitor waiting. Understanding dawned on her. The guide, the storyteller. She gave him a small, respectful nod, which he returned. Would you like to start next week? Miss Thorne asked Elara, turning back to her. Elara looked up at her mother, who smiled and gave a tiny nod. Then she looked over at Mr. Anton in the doorway. He winked at her. She thought about the grand piano upstairs and her old friend in the basement. She thought about stormy music and written notes. It wasn't a choice between them anymore. It was a bridge being built. Yes, Elara said, her voice finding a little more strength. Yes, please. The following Monday, instead of just cleaning the classrooms, Elara walked into Miss Thorne's music room as a student. The sunlight was the same. The grand piano was the same. But everything else was different. Miss Thorne began not with scales, but with a question. Play me the feeling of this morning's sunlight, she said. Elara, hesitant at first, touched the keys. She played a soft, climbing melody, warm and gentle. Miss Thorne listened, then smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. Good, she said. Now, let me show you how the composers write that feeling down. It's called a key. It's called a major chord. It's another way to tell the same story. And so, Elara's new path began. She still spent her afternoons in the basement with Mr. Anton, who would now ask, So, what new words did you learn for the rain today? She would tell him about crescendos and arpeggios, and he would nod and say, Good words for a storm. She learned to read music. The notes on the page stopped being confusing insects and started to become a map of territories she had already visited in her heart. She still played with feeling first, but now she had tools to understand, refine, and share that feeling. Miss Thorne became her fiercest advocate, but in a quiet way. She never tried to change how Elara felt the music. Instead, she gave her the vocabulary to talk about it, the technique to control it, and the confidence to own it. The girl who couldn't read music had not just played a piece beautifully. She had played a new understanding into the room, one that changed a teacher, honored a mother, and proved that while music can be built on a foundation of paper, its true home is always in the human heart. And sometimes, the most beautiful songs start in the quietest, most unexpected places, like a dusty basement with an old piano and a story waiting to be told.